sure, but there's been some response from schools who anticipate students walking out, hasn't there?
Yeah, in Texas, the head of one school district in particular has said he's going to suspend any students engaging in any of these protests. Many are saying this is unfair, it violates their rights, and they should be allowed to walk out if they want. Some Texas lawyers have actually already went on social media and said that they will offer their services for free for any students who do get threatened with punishment.
This being a turning point in the recent history of gun violence in America, what evidence have you seen for that, Kelly?
Well, a lot of people are saying this time feels different to other shootings. The students are coming together across the country to sort of create this national movement of teenagers. One Florida survivor called Alex Wind said to me, the students in Sandy Hook, they were too young to stand up and speak out, but believe me, we're going to be the change. These students seem to be saying enough is enough. They're sick of the same arguments, the same conversations they've heard time and time before.
We heard in the listening session with President Trump, one of the students mentioned Sandy Hook. Now that was an elementary school shooting in the US state of Connecticut, where 20 children and 6 adults were shot dead in 2012. Although they had no basis in truth, hundreds of YouTube videos, blogs and tweets repeated the conspiracy theories. And we've seen that happen with some regularity, and it seems to have happened again here, Kelly.
Yeah, one of the students from Florida in particular, a guy called David Hogg, has already become the focus of a number of different conspiracy theories online. Right-wing outlets have started pushing stories to say these students aren't real survivors, that they're these so-called crisis actors who are capitalizing on the shooting to push a sort of left-wing liberal agenda on gun laws.
What I'm looking for is reasonable change with the United States Congress and bills that are passed before I get back to school. Because this is not the time for inaction and debate. This is the time for discussion and for all people that are Americans to come together as Americans through love and compassion. This event happened on Valentine's Day. So many people lost loved ones. Our community and our nation have taken too many bullets to the heart, and now is the time for us to stand up.
We just heard from David Hogg there. Why was he the student who became the particular focus of attention?
He's been targeted because he's one of the most vocal, but also because he's came out and said that his dad used to be an FBI agent. The more this clip got spread around, the more people believed he and some of the other more vocal survivors of the attack were actually these gun control advocates who were speaking to the media only to kind of push this anti-Trump agenda.
And there was a video that was doing the rounds as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a video on YouTube supporting this theory that David Hogg is this crisis actor. It reached #1 on YouTube's trending chart and got over 200,000 views before the website actually removed it.
Now, in terms of action and change, President Trump came out and said that one of the possible solutions would be to arm teachers. How did that go down?
Well, in some states, teachers can actually already carry guns, but it's a massively controversial idea. Others totally reject the idea. In response, they've been posting selfies online with using the hashtag #ArmMeWith to reject it.
What does that mean, arm me with?
Well, they're saying arm me with things like books, pencils, school supplies. I don't need to have a gun.
Now, there are programs that train teachers on how to use weapons to respond to these kinds of shootings. We spoke to Joe Eaton, who's a program director of an organisation called Faster Saves Lives. They train teachers to respond to shootings, not just with weapons, but also with things like first aid and how to handle kids in emergencies.
There's not gun violence and other types of violence. We live in a violent society. There are firearms in this world. There will always be firearms in this world. And that's what we see right now. Every time one of these events happens, whether it's in a school or someplace else, you have certain staff or certain people who are going to willingly go toward the sound of that gunfire and stand between these murderers and these kids. Schools are identifying them and letting that staff choose whatever tools and training they're comfortable with, so they get a chance to go home to their families at the end of the night. Most of these events are over in 2 to 3 minutes. And even if you look at Sandy Hook Elementary School, if the school is relying on outside help, there were police officers at Sandy Hook Elementary School within 3 minutes and 16 seconds, and we still lost 20 babies that day. So if the school waits on outside help as their only plan, they're simply saying that 20 dead students and 6 dead staff is acceptable, and that can't be acceptable anymore.
So where does this leave us then, Kelly? Are we going to see the same toing and froing in the gun control debate we've seen with previous shootings, or is this the first step to changes in legislation?
It's really hard to say. To be honest, this does feel quite different. Donald Trump has came out and said that he will support certain changes. He wants the national limit for buying rifles to go from 18 to 21, and he's also said that he'll support a ban on so-called bump stock devices.
That sounds interesting. What's a bump stock device?
A bump stock is a device that you fit to a gun to make it shoot faster. We saw it used in the Las Vegas shootings last year. But the students say that the president's measures do not go far enough. They want much more radical changes to gun laws. They want a total ban on these so-called assault weapons, which are the sort of semi-automatic guns we see used in a lot of different mass shootings, places like Sandy Hook and the Aurora Cinema shooting. They also want politicians to start rejecting any sort of political donations from gun lobby groups. This is a start of a very long process. I think we're going to hear a lot more of this in the weeks to come.
Thanks very much, Kelly. Now, Elizabeth Casson is here. You've been looking at the rise and fall of an anonymous messaging app, which has been accused of allowing bullying.
Yeah, we wrote a blog in February last year about the app Saraha. A lot of people were talking about it, and it's now back in the news. Saraha, which means honesty in Arabic, was developed in Saudi Arabia. It allows you to receive honest feedback from your employees and your friends in a private manner.
So basically, you make an account, you share your page, and then people can go on your page and send you anonymous messages.
Yeah, and it took off around the globe, topping the Apple App Store in more than 30 countries in July last year. The app has over 300 million users worldwide, but it's not been entirely popular with everyone.
That sounds really weird, because it's got millions of users, so what's the issue here?
That's because it's been accused of enabling cyberbullying, because the people receiving negative messages don't know who sent them. Katrina Collins, who lives in Queensland, Australia, became aware of the app after her 13-year-old daughter went on a sleepover to a friend's house.
The friend had Saraha, so the friend was receiving the messages about my daughter. Obviously, whoever was sending through the messages knew that my daughter was at her house.
When Katrina later saw the screenshotted images on her daughter's phone, she was appalled by what she saw.
She was sent a screenshot of various horrendous comments that were made about her and things that she should be doing to herself.
One of the messages said her daughter was, quote, such a she makes everyone hurt and I hope she kills herself. Seriously, no one would care.
I was quite shocked that there was an app out there that allowed people to post anonymously, and I guess that's where it sort of stemmed from.
Katrina created a petition calling for the app Saraha to be taken off Apple's App Store and Google Play. The petition compared Saraha to another anonymous messaging app called SayIt.me, and that app was used by George Hussey, a 15-year-old boy in the UK who took his own life last year. It was reported he'd been receiving abuse on the app.
Now, how did the company react in that case?
So, SayIt.me suspended use of their website. You can no longer get onto that social network. Katrina in the petition also wrote about Amy Everett, nicknamed Dolly. She was a 14-year-old girl in Australia that took her own life last month. Dolly's family says she'd been bullied online, and police there are investigating what happened.
I'd actually read an article on Dolly, a news article about her and what had happened, and this was only a few days prior she had done this. So it kind of really hit home that this girl in our region had been experiencing the same type of thing, and now my daughter was experiencing that. So I had this massive fear that this could happen to me and this could happen to my family, and my daughter is being affected by this as well. I can only do so much for my daughter and my family and educate them and support them, monitor what she's getting, but I can't do that for other children, and I wanted to get rid of this app because I feel like it facilitates cyberbullying, and if it's happening to my daughter, it's happening to a hell of a lot of other kids out there as well.
The petition's anti-bullying message seemed to resonate with a lot of people, right?
Yeah, it gained nearly 500,000 supporters.
So what impact has there been off the back of that?
Well, in the weeks since the petition was started, both Apple and Google have removed Saraha from their app platforms. I contacted Google to find out why they'd chosen to remove the app. They said, quote, we don't comment on specific apps. If an app breaks our policies, we have it removed. And Apple did not respond to my request for comment. But I spoke to Zainal Abdin Tawfiq, the CEO of Saraha. He believed the app had been taken down from these platforms because of Katrina's petition. He says he's in conversation with Google and Apple trying to resolve the issue, trying to show what the company is doing to curb harassment and bullying on the app. I asked him what the idea behind Saraha had been.
Saraha is a constructive feedback platform. The goal of Saraha is to self-develop individuals and organizations by receiving constructive feedback.
Zayn told me they've been putting protections in place since they started noticing people misusing the app. He says they took the early proactive measure of putting to a limited chosen circle, and since the petition they've taken further steps.
We've upgraded the filtering system to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to filter messages and moderate the content. So basically if someone says kill yourself, then kill is a keyword. But if someone says jump off a cliff, then now these robots will be able to detect that and block it as well.
While the petition did spur them on to make these improvements, Zayn denies the allegation Katrina made in the petition. He says that after they saw the petition, they ran a copy of the message that Katrina says her daughter's friend received through their app, which included a swear word.
Just to clarify, this petition is based on a message that has a bad word which gets filtered by Saraha's engines. So we do believe that this message never made it through our filters. Right after receiving this petition, we replicated the message and it didn't go through.
Is it possible that this message went through before you had your algorithm changed?
No, we believe not. So we have not changed the filter before our test. As soon as we received this petition, we've tried to run it through Saraha and it didn't go through.
So he's saying that this petition was a surprise to them because those words should have been blocked.
Yes, Zayn thinks that there's been some sort of miscommunication here, but Katrina is adamant that the message did send.
Oh no, it definitely sent. So we have the screenshot with many words, different words that have been used about her that are worse than that word. So yeah, there was no filters at all that picked up. They were all sent, and I've got the screenshots to prove them all.
Katrina has sent me multiple screenshots of abusive messages that seem to sit on the Saraha app on her daughter's friend's phone. Now, in looking into this story, Jonathan, I have made my own Saraha account, and I logged out of that account to see if I could send myself the kinds of phrases and words that appeared on these messages, and they did not arrive in my inbox when I logged in again. But that could be because of the recent algorithm change that Zayn mentioned earlier.
So what's Zayn doing to solve the problem?
He says he's trying to work with the App Store and Google Play to get the app back up and running on their platforms, whereas Katrina is hoping that the Australian government will legislate against anonymous social media apps.
But Saraha is not the first anonymous app to attract controversy, is it? I mean, I remember Ask FM, there was Yik Yak, Secret, there's been quite a few of these.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot, and they're often very popular when they do appear, but they also sometimes have quite a short shelf life because of these sorts of accusations. But I don't think that we're seeing the last of them. There's going to be a lot more to come.
Thanks very much for your time, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Kelly Lee Cooper and Elizabeth Casson reporting on BBC Traffic. Jonathan Griffin there. Next up, you may think you know who the most successful Winter Olympic team is. Have you thought of it statistically? What are the chances of seeing a dead heat in a bobsleigh race? Find out after the break.
This is the BBC World Service. Every day, throughout the day, the newsroom gives you a global perspective on world events.
First to Southern California.
Sophie Long is our correspondent in the South Korean capitals.
Our correspondent David Willis joins us now from Washington.
Stephanie Hegarty went to the city of Benin in southern Nigeria.
Here's more from our global science correspondent Victoria.
Get the latest insight and analysis as the story develops.
The White House press briefing is just the beginning of this very second.
There have been some dramatic developments. The latest.
An utterly stunning night.
Shockwaves continue to reverberate.
Our Middle East correspondent has an exclusive report.
It's off the scale. This is as bad as it gets. You're due to vote any minute now.
A massive reversal at extraordinary speed.
Stay up to date around the clock with the newsroom. Every day on the BBC World Service.
Hello and welcome back to The Thought Show on the BBC World Service with me, Jordan Dunbar.
And with me, Hazel McNeil.
Coming up soon, More or Less creates an alternative Winter Olympics table based on statistics and tells you how many bobsleigh races we have to watch to witness a dead heat.
News with Neil Nunes. Hope Hicks, the 29-year-old White House communications director, has announced that she's resigning. She's one of President Trump's longest-serving advisors. Mr. Trump said he would miss having her by his side. White House officials denied that the move was linked to evidence Ms. Hicks gave to a congressional committee, during which she reportedly admitted telling white lies on behalf of Mr. Trump. Donald Trump has said it's time to act on gun safety. During a televised meeting with Republican and Democratic Party politicians, he urged them to pass strong, comprehensive laws in the wake of the Florida school shooting. Walmart has become the second biggest big retailer to stop selling firearms and ammunition to customers under the age of 21. The UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator says it has proved impossible to make any aid deliveries to besieged areas of Syria despite the Security Council vote for a month-long ceasefire. Mark Lowcock said trucks were ready to enter a number of areas, but fighting had continued. Environmentalists have condemned a decision by Brazil's Supreme Court to uphold major changes to laws protecting the Amazon rainforest. The proposals, passed by the Brazilian Congress 5 years ago but never implemented, establish an amnesty which scraps penalties for past illegal deforestation. A former senior executive of the Brazilian firm Odebrecht says the company gave money to 6 Peruvian politicians, including the current president, for their electoral campaigns. President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski is alleged to have received about $300,000 7 years ago. Mr. Kuczynski has denied wrongdoing. The music streaming service Spotify has announced it plans to start trading its shares publicly on the New York Stock Exchange. The Swedish company faces stiff competition from Apple and Amazon. BBC News.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Thought Show on the BBC World Service. I'm Jordan Dunbar.
And I'm Lizzie McNeil. Coming up, whether you're the victim or the perpetrator, we've all experienced bullying.
Will pollute the whole area. They've written to President Putin asking him, pigs here, Valier says. We'll block the road if we have to. We've lost patience. There's a saying, you know, one spark can cause an inferno. But down at the Silver Ponds Culture Club, when I tell this local band that I've come from Britain, from the BBC, that strikes a bum note. BBC only So, you're a foreign agent, one musician sneers. He goes on to criticise NATO for enlarging to the east. Russia doesn't expand into other people's territory, he claims. Except Crimea, but that was ours anyway. The conversation is cut short by the Culture Club manager who's just walked in. The manager orders me to exclude the musician's political comments from my report. In more than 20 years at the BBC, I tell her, no one has tried to censor me like this. It's time to leave. In one little town, I've experienced the contradictions of Russia. Hospitality and suspicion, hardship, yet support for the Kremlin. And in many ways, Russia today is like Catherine the Great's ride through the bogs of Silver Ponds. A rough ride for sure, but somehow the carriage keeps moving.
Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg, who travelled 100 miles away from Moscow.
16 minutes past the hour newsday from the BBC World Service. Kirsten Webster standing by with the sports news. Don't look so shocked, Kirsten. That's why you're in the
watching
studio.
the TV. Wait, why am I here?
with news of Neymar and that foot and what's happening to it. But let's go to Italy now. Italy for the Italians. That is the slogan of the leader of the far-right party, Lega, that you may have known previously as the Northern League. Matteo Salvini is hoping to become Italy's next Prime Minister in this weekend's elections, and he is getting support in the south with his persistent attacks on African migrants, who he claims are invading Italy. Now that prompted Gabriella Nobile, an Italian mother, to write an open letter to him on a Facebook post. I caught up with her earlier.
I have 2 children adopted from Africa. The eldest is from Congo and the other one is from Ethiopia. It's a boy and a girl. In Italy we don't have a lot of African people. My son is absolutely able to defend himself from children that has his age. But from 3 or 4 months he started to have verbal attacks from adults. And this for me is unbelievable. He goes 3 times in a week alone with a bus. He has this big bag on his shoulder. Life, but if Salvini will win, you will go at home. So I think that this is too much.
And you would put down the rise in these kind of racist attacks directly down to Matteo Salvini and his party. What they've been saying in the election campaign.
Yeah, he concentrated most of his campagna elettorale,
electoral campaign,
on the problem of the immigration. Like all the problem we have in Italy is from immigration. My children are black. Of course, they cannot go outside with a tattoo. I am Italian. I have all my documents okay. You know what I mean?
And they were adopted from a very young age. They feel Italian, presumably, and they sound they sound Italian, don't they? They are Italian.
Absolutely. And I'm from south of Italy. They talk better Milanese than me. So they absolutely feel Italian. They are Italian. So I felt that I have to write something because words are important, and our politician must use the right words.
How do you then have a debate in Italy about an issue that clearly an awful lot of people feel strongly about? They feel the migrant issue, as in many other European countries, is something that needs to be discussed. Would you agree that it needs to be discussed?
I absolutely know that it's a huge problem that must be solved in some way, but this is another issue. We cannot say before Italia. What does it mean before Italia?
President Donald Trump had America first now.
Yeah.
And Matteo Salvini has Italians first. Try and explain to us what kind of effect this has had on your children, on your son, who was just on his way to football training and was verbally attacked by a grown-up in this way. How did that make him feel?
Not only once. My son is really keeps everything inside himself. So I just saw him that he was sad, that he has headache. I needed 2 days to understand, to let him talk about this. When he talked to me, he asked me, but why? I mean, why they are so angry with me? I'm only a child.
What does your daughter tell you?
She wrote in a small paper, I hope that guy will stop to say bad things on the brown people. Because my children, they say that they are brown, they are not black. As they say that we are not white, we are pink. It really shocked me.
Gabriella Nabil talking about the 2 children. Her children she adopted as babies. They spent their entire lives as Italian. They are Italian, getting racist abuse on a daily basis now, which is very sad indeed. 8:21.
You're listening to Newsday on the BBC World Service. Let's get sports headlines now with Kirsten Webster.
Yes, the Tottenham manager Mauricio Pochettino says the use of video assistant referees is fundamentally changing football. Spurs beat Rochdale 6-1 at Wembley last night to book a FA Cup quarter-final place against Swansea. But there were 4 big VAR decisions in the game, including 2 disallowed Tottenham goals. Pochettino says the emotion is being killed from the game. The world's most expensive footballer, Neymar, will have surgery on his foot in Brazil in the coming days after Paris Saint-Germain and Neymar agreed operating was the best treatment for his broken bone in his foot. It means Neymar has a chance for recovery. In the Premier League, Wenger is once again facing calls for him to go, and the World Indoor Athletics Championships start later in Birmingham.
Kong, Andrew, welcome. Let's start off with Spotify, the music streaming service, getting ready to sell its shares to the public for the very first time, taking a rather unusual route. Tell us about it.
Yes, it's going to sell the shares, it's applied to sell the shares directly on the New York Stock Exchange, rather than employing very expensive investment banks to create new shares and then market those shares, and then if the shares don't achieve the price that they want, guaranteeing that they would pay something like Spotify a certain amount so that they wouldn't lose any money. Now that costs a lot of money, so Spotify, by selling their shares directly, it means that the people who already have shares, who have accumulated them over the past 10 years or so as Spotify got bigger and needed more capital, but they'll be able to basically cash in their holdings if they want to and take their profits. And at the moment you can buy Spotify shares, but you have to find somebody who's willing to sell them, and that could mean, you'd actually have to stump up millions of dollars in order to buy them. By selling these shares on the stock market, it means that ordinary investors who may want to buy as few as, say, 100 shares will be able to do that.
Which is good news, I suppose. And the profits of Spotify, do they justify the estimates that the company could well be worth $23 billion?
That's a big one, because this is the first time that Spotify, by applying to the regulators, has actually given details, or many more details of its financial position. And although revenues, which it makes from selling adverts for Spotify's free service, so you listen to music and you hear adverts, or subscriptions, which it sells for the premium services, so that you don't hear adverts at all and you get a better quality. Now, that's been going up. It went up by 40% last year, I believe up to about $500 million. And Spotify has many, many more of these premium subscribers than rival services like Amazon and Apple have. But it's still losing money. It's losing hundreds of millions, perhaps $1 billion a year. And there are plenty of skeptics out there who say that Spotify would have to grow an enormous amount in order to justify what Spotify is saying. They're estimating that they think the business could be worth up to $23 billion.
Andrew, thank you. Andrew Wood, BBC's Business Desk, live from Hong Kong for us.
Now, the first light which ever shone in the universe, or the long-sought cosmic dawn, has been detected by astronomers using a simple radio antenna positioned in the Western Australian desert. The breakthrough has been described as the most important discovery in astronomy since the detection of gravitational waves. I spoke to astronomer David Brin and first asked him to explain this light.
Well, it's actually a little difficult. Most people today are aware that the scientific theory is that the universe began in a big bang 13.7 billion years ago. And most of the light that falls on our radio telescopes or our telescope lenses or cameras or eyes came from that era, and only a little bit from more recent stars and galaxies. But the universe has expanded so much that it's been stretched into radio waves. Now, we study these radio waves, and we can only look back to a time that was 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Until that moment, the electrons and the protons that made up most of the mass of the universe weren't connected to each other, and so you had what was called a plasma, an ionized gas, and none of the radiation could escape. But about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, suddenly they joined together, the electrons and the protons, they formed a neutral gas, and 99.999% of the light in the universe escaped into the blackness.
Right.
What these people have discovered is that 180 million years later, there was another period, another curtain fell. It wasn't as strong, but it was a curtain that fell across this light, and after that came what's called this dawn, and this was a great discovery.
So this is effectively one of the earliest lights that lifted the universe out of darkness from that curtain that you talked about. It happened millions of years ago, as you just said. Why can we still detect the signal now, or how have they been able to do that?
Well, if you aim any kind of a telescope, well, really a radio telescope, at any of the gaps between any of the visible stars and galaxies, and of course you have to have a very powerful one because inevitably there is a star in a galaxy wherever you look. But if you find those gaps and you look between them, there's still light coming in. And that light is mostly radio waves. We know it. It's the background radiation that's cooled off to 3 degrees, but it is left over from just 380,000 years after the Big Bang. And then there was a period 100 million years later when the first stars were born. And when these first stars were born, they were very hot, and they ionized the gas again and brought down that curtain again. The curtain wasn't as far down, but we can see both of these events. And isn't it wonderful to be a member of a civilization that can figure out and see the clear evidence of events so soon after the universe was made? We're amazing people. We're an amazing civilization.
Well, we have an amazing person with us, Dan Damon. That was David Brin explaining that phenomenon and having faith in the human civilization. Dan Damon is here to tell us what's happening on World Update in 90 minutes' time.
We're going to talk about guns and the NRA and the reversal of fortune.
The whole motivating force of the NRA is to convince people that we're at this sort of existential fight for the future of the republic, and they risk losing membership to groups further to the right if they compromise. But on the other hand, if they don't compromise, they risk being seen as more and more of an extremist group. So I think they're sort of in a weak position now. There's really no good way for them to go.
More on that on World Update.
It's goodbye from us here on Newsday.
This is the BBC World Service. The news follows shortly after this. Two women with a shared experience.
The title of First Lady you get by virtue of merit. And like with all unearned privilege, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it.
I had to deal with both practical things and stuff within the family, and everything changed.
A unified spirit?
I went out of the building with my white cane. That was a really good time to contemplate by myself.
you just accept your blindness and then there's no looking back after that.
Or a matching talent. I wanted to become an elite gymnast. That requires more hours. So then I had to start homeschooling.
I grew up in a communist system. For me, gymnastics was a door opener to the world.
I'm Kim Chakanetsa, and each week we bring together two women from different parts of the world, united by a common thread.
The Conversation. Listen online or subscribe to the podcast at bbcworldservice.com.
This is the BBC World Service. I'm Manuela Saragossa, and in Business Daily shortly, Italians go to the polls in 3 days' time in what many see as the EU's next big test amid a populist surge. Top of the agenda is immigration, and campaigning politicians there have been making some pretty extravagant spending promises. So why aren't financial markets more worried about the Italian elections? That's after the news.
BBC News with Gareth Barlow. The American retail giant Walmart is to restrict the sale of guns. The company said it was acting in the light of recent events, a reference to the shooting at a school in Florida in which 17 people were killed. The shooting has led to growing demands for tougher gun controls. One of President Trump's closest aides, the White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, is standing down. It comes a day after she testified to an inquiry into Russian interference in the 2016 election. During the hearing, she admitted telling what she described as white lies from Mr. Trump, but said she hadn't been untruthful. Japan has lodged a formal protest with South Korea in the latest stage of a long-running dispute over Japan's use of what are known as comfort women, who were forced to work in military brothels during the Second World War. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in had described the wartime policy as a crime against humanity. Documents released by New Zealand's Secret Service have confirmed that a 17-year-old boy tried to assassinate Queen Elizabeth while she was touring the country in 1981. Christopher Lewis fired a single shot at the Queen's Rolls-Royce car in the city of Dunedin. President Vladimir Putin is due to deliver his annual State of the Nation speech shortly, the last before he stands for re-election. He's expected to use the speech as a platform to set out his key policies. A detailed study of data from across Africa suggests that no country on the continent will achieve a UN goal of ending childhood hunger by the end of the next decade. The report acknowledges that progress has been made in some countries. And a major inquiry into child sex abuse in Britain is due to publish its first completed report on the forced migration of thousands of children after the Second World War. The scandal has been described as leaving the most catastrophic child abuse legacy in Britain in living memory. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC. I'm Manuela Saragossa. Coming up, free veterinary visits and a basic income for all. Just some of the extravagant election promises being made by Italian politicians ahead of Sunday's polls there.
It's a lot of lies that have been told. I think it's even insulting the intelligence of people.
The economy has taken a back seat in Italy's election campaign. Immigration has dominated debate. We'll hear from Rome.
Look, I've travelled all over the world. I've been everywhere. It's not that I don't like anyone. It's that we're in extreme poverty in Italy. It's pointless to let people come if we're poor too.
What does it all mean for the Italian economy? That's all here in Business Daily from the BBC. His next big test amid the populist surge. The issue that's dominated the Italian campaign is immigration. Not on the agenda is the country's monstrous public debt. Italy owes the world some 2.3 trillion euros. That's about 132% of the total value of the economy there. Yet almost all parties in this election are promising some big spending programmes. We'll come to that in just a moment. First though, the BBC's Mike Johnson is in Rome, and we can speak to him from there now. Mike, great to have you on the show. The economy in Italy appears to have been taking a back seat in this campaign.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if politicians don't want to talk about austerity at a time when they want to get elected. Everybody seems to be saying, let's spend, 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 to try to get some sort of growth going. I'm standing right in front of the Pantheon here in Rome, a former Roman temple, in the very heart of the city. You might just about be able to hear the water in the fountains and all the cafes around here putting out tables. Rome is waking up, the tourists are gathering. You talked about the debt there. It's interesting, when you pull into Rome's main train station, you see clocks that tell the time. You also see clocks that tell the debt. It's a big debt clock ticking ever higher. Underneath it there's a warning: every election promise brings debt. So there's warnings. You know, whether the politicians are bothered about that is another yes. I've got a funny feeling the people are very well aware that a lot of these promises aren't going to be backed up, all these big spending promises. Something else that's remarkable about this campaign, Manuela, is how the loyalty many Italians have traditionally had towards the European Union is being severely tested by the migrant crisis Europe's had to deal with in recent years. It's immigration which has taken the front seat throughout this campaign, if it's the economy that's taken the back seat. Italy, of course, has been on the front line of that migrant crisis, and politicians over the last few weeks have almost been queuing up to say, look, we're prepared to send X 100,000 people back home if we get into power. Well, all of this is leaving plenty of Italians feeling angry. Election rally in Florence for the Lega party. This is one of the parties in Silvio Berlusconi's centre-right alliance, which is ahead in the polls. Lega's slogan is Prima gli Italiani, Italians first. And this place is packed. There must be between about 500 and 600 people all crowded into this hall. It's very firmly anti-immigration, this party, and if the polls are right, that could have a strong influence on the policies of the next Italian government.
Senta, io ho girato tutto il mondo, sono stata da tutte le parti.
Look, I've travelled all over the world, I've been everywhere. It's not that I don't like anyone, it's that we're in extreme poverty in Italy. It's pointless to let people come if we're poor too. When you let people come, you need jobs for them. Here there's no work anymore, not even for us. Our manufacturers are gone, and this is what they've reduced us to.
Questo ci hanno ridotto.
Sostengo la Lega perché secondo me un programma.
I support Lega because in my view it has the right policies, as it's written in the slogan, Italians first. I don't have anything against immigrants, but immigration is a problem for Italy, like it's a problem for other countries. A problem which I believe Italy is no longer able to contain.
Non riesce più a contenere.
I've come to northeastern Italy now, to the city of Treviso, about 30 kilometres north of Venice, in the Veneto region. The centre of Treviso, where the tourists go, is an attractive place, really, with meandering waterways and smart shopping streets. The attractive centre is not where I'm standing right now. Like most of the world's cities, Treviso also has its less inviting areas. This is the Quinto district. In front of me are some high-rise apartment blocks, and on this very spot, on a hot July night,
one bus arrived in the night.
A bus full of migrants?
Yeah, the first 50 migrants. The residents brought all the furniture that was organized for the migrants, and they took televisions, they took beds, they took all the stuff that were prepared for refugees, and they do a big fire.
What were they angry about?
They felt abandoned from the government. This is an area with no services, low prices for the flats, and they weren't prepared. They thought that area began to become like a ghetto.
Despite that kind of opposition, efforts are being made to try to integrate migrants into the local economy.
I'm just cutting the wood for the table.
Lamin is 28 and a carpenter by trade. We met in a former Treviso army barracks, which has been converted into a workshop where asylum seekers make furniture, embroidery and textiles and try to sell their handiwork in local markets. Born in the Gambia in West Africa, he arrived on the southern Italian shoreline at Lampedusa in 2015 after a journey which took him through Nigeria, Niger and Libya.
My journey is very difficult. We brought up almost 150 people.
150 people on your boat.
Some people died in the boat.
because some people are suffering. People
Must have been very frightening.
Yeah. Yes.
Survivors have described a 66-foot boat sinking with 500 people on board.
Lamin was lucky. Many migrants have lost their lives travelling by sea from Africa to the shores of Italy.
During the day, survivors were brought to Lampedusa, some of them wrapped in foil.
More than 600,000 have made the perilous journey since 2013. Recently, though, the numbers have been falling. Last year it was 119,000, a third fewer than in 2016 migrants, if they get elected. This was Silvio Berlusconi, leader of the Forza Italia party, speaking to Italian television earlier in the campaign.
In Italia, per colpa dei governi della sinistra.
In Italy, because of left-wing governments, there has been no control over immigration. Today, there are at least 630,000 migrants in Italy, of which only around 30,000 have escaped from war, death, or persecution and have the right to claim the status of refugee and stay in our country. All others don't have that right.
Tutti gli altri questo diritto non ce l'avranno.
Statements like that are making migrants like Lamin in Treviso fear for their future in Italy.
Life in Italy is for the immigrants. I want to be happy. But right now, I'm praying for God to help us.
Gambian migrant Lamin in Italy, ending that report by Mike Johnson. Well, when they're not talking about migration, most of the big parties in Italy are proposing sweeping tax cuts and a boost in welfare and pensions. Some of the election promises are even downright bizarre. Mr. Berlusconi's, the former Italian Prime Minister, Forza Italia party, for example, has pledged to cut taxes on pet food and provide a free visit to the vet every 15 days. But what's leaving economists scratching their heads in disbelief is that parties also promised to drastically reduce the country's debt. Economists like Elsa Fornero, she's a professor of economics at Turin University. She was also a minister in the Italian government back in 2011 when the country's cost of borrowing spiked, bringing Italy close to bankruptcy. At the time, she led reform of the pension system, which made her popular with financial markets, but not so popular with voters. Now, a lot of campaigning politicians are threatening to undo some of her work.
Well, it's a lot of lies that have been told. I think it's even insulting the intelligence of people, because really very few things of what has been said in this depressing electoral campaign has some criticism.
The elections, given those extravagant spending promises. Shouldn't investors be panicking? A question for Luigi Zingalis, an expat Italian who's professor of finance at the University of Chicago. He also co-hosts a podcast called Capital Isn't.
Financial markets, I think I've learned that the power really is in the hands of the ECB, the European Central Bank, not in the hands of voters. Whoever is going to govern will be tied enough to the European mast that he or she will not be able to do much.
Although half the politicians campaigning in Italy at the moment are blaming the EU for all of Italy's problems.
I would say probably even more than half. But this is, unfortunately, this is what is taking place.
In the meantime, there is so much anti-EU sentiment in Italy, and also anti-Euro sentiment in Italy. Where is all that going to lead?
I think that is very, very costly to leave the euro, especially unilaterally. And so I think that is a bit like Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave. That's where Italy is stuck in this moment, where they cannot get out, and they cannot really live well in it. And the most important thing, there is very little desire of the rest of Europe to modify the rules in order to make things better.
What could Europe do then to address some of that anti-Euro, anti-EU sentiment in Italy?
Oh, I think there is a very simple thing that I've been advocating for the last 4 years, which is to start a federal unemployment insurance. This is number one right from an economic point of view, because we know that if you have a common currency, then we have to have some form of fiscal redistribution. And the fiscal redistribution that is anti-cyclical, i.e.